what is so great about Nebbiolo for you? I know it is, I don't mean to make light of it because I do know that it's something that you love.
Right. So, what makes a grape like one of the classic grapes, one of the legendary grapes of the world is, I think, in two ways. One, it has to somehow translate the circumstances from where it's grown. So, whether that's soil, climate, the people, but it also has to be age worthy and, become more and more interesting as it ages. And just Nebbiolo is that kind of grape. And it's distinctly Italian, but it has traits that are similar to Pinot Noir, for example. The other great, wine connoisseurs all over the world or the industry feel is probably the best example of that.
Hey, y'all. I'm Jessica Dupuy, guest host for a special series on the Barolo and Barbaresco World Opening 2025, presented by Landmarks. This fourth edition of BBWO will showcase the latest releases of 2021 Barolo and 2022 Barbaresco wines from Piedmont and takes place in Austin, Texas on March 25th. Join me in the heart of Texas as we delve into the experiences and insights about the terroir of the Langhe region and its star grape variety, Nebbiolo. We'll talk to sommeliers and retailers from the key markets of Austin, Dallas, Houston, and beyond about the alluring wines of the Barolo and Barbaresco regions. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and rate our show wherever you rate your podcasts. Note, this series is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the podcast participants only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or of the granting authority. Neither the European Union nor the granting authority can be held responsible for them. All right, so Stephen McDonald, welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on with me, and we can talk a little bit about Barolo and Barbaresco.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Jessica. This is great.
Yeah, so I've known you for a long time, and I am excited to be able to introduce you to kind of the listeners here, but perhaps maybe you could do that introduction. So who is Stephen McDonald? Where are you from? And kind of, you don't have to start with like, I was born in San Antonio kind of thing,
Yeah.
but just kind of, tell us what you do in Texas and kind of your career in terms of wine.
Yeah, for sure. Wine is a second career for me. So I used to be a school teacher. I was a band director. That's what I went to university for. And so after doing that for a little bit, I moved to New York and I just found myself in the hospitality industry instead of teaching. And that's where I really caught the bug to be a wine professional. And so after a few years there, came to Houston in 2011 and got hired by Pappas Brothers Steakhouse, the original in the Galleria, to be a floor sommelier. And so after a couple of years, they made me the wine director. A number of years after that, I passed my Master Sommelier exam. Then coming back after COVID, things picking back up and us getting all of our teams back, they put me in charge of what is now all three locations of Pappas Brothers Steakhouses. So the original one in Houston at the Galleria location, one in Dallas, and one in actually downtown Houston. And currently they all have Wine Spectator Grand Award. They all have a team of sommeliers and wine directors. And the Galleria location just recently won Wine List of the Year and Best Long Wine List in the World from World of Fine Wine. So it's big. They're big programs. They're a lot of fun. They're classic. There's something for everybody. It's a really fun opportunity for me.
Okay, so I'm going to brag on this a little bit because we're both from Texas. We know these things, but Pappas Brothers Steakhouse, first of all, it's Texas. I think most people can quickly make the association that in Texas, steak is a big deal. So Pappas Brothers Steakhouse being probably one of the best steakhouses in all of the state. And as you mentioned, they have one Dallas, two Houston locations. And you mentioned the awards from Wine Spectator and World of Fine Wine in terms of the wine programs. And I just want to make sure that people understand that y'all's list, y'all's cellar is deep and wide, and not just in terms of selection of what's around the world, but also in terms of vintages, right? Like what are some of the vintages of things that you have?
Some of the more like rare older vintages is like, for example, there's a bottle of Chateau d'Yquem 1811, right? At the Galleria location. And there's little things like that with either 100 or over 100 years age, at either of the locations. And it's just taken an incredible amount of first of all, capital investment, but just a lot of time to accumulate the types of products to fill out the wine list and to win some awards. So that was something that ownership was dedicated to almost from the beginning.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about too is just, in America we think West Coast and East Coast have kind of like the big deal wine list, whether that's New York, LA, that sort of thing. But Texas is such a big wine market, particularly in Houston and Dallas. So I just kind of want to make sure we're shedding light on that. And I think that Pappas Brothers does such a great job in doing that for the state of Texas. And then one of the other things that I love about y'all's program is your mentorship. You guys have really groomed and brought up a lot of the great sommeliers in Texas over the years. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, again, it's a testament to kind of ownership's dedication to education. And, in whatever form that comes in, whether it's a quarter master sommeliers or WSET or however. And so just internally, we focus a lot on that, and we focus a lot on leadership and program organization. And so, yes, you're right. There are some people who've gone after their time at Pappas Brothers being a sommelier, gone on to be fantastic wine directors or pass whatever credential that they want to pass. And so all over the state, you're starting to see people running programs that came from Pappas Brothers sommelier team. So we're really, really proud of that.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. All right, so let's transition a little bit to the passions of Stephen McDonald. One being the fact that, you said you were a school teacher, but let's go ahead and bring a couple of things together here, which is that you weren't a band director, but your dad or somebody was a band director. Is that correct?
No, he was a career band director, but I was a band director as well.
You were as well. Okay.
Yeah, so you went to university, played my instrument, toured with a show for a while, came back and finished. So that was everything leading up to age 22 or so was geared towards music and
Okay.
playing my instrument.
Okay. So that's one passion. The other passion being the Nebbiolo grape.
Right. Right. Yeah. So when those two passions collide, right? So when I stopped playing my instrument, there was just a whole load of other categories of music to get interested in. And I think like probably starting around 2015, 2016, got really passionate about hip hop. And then me and my buddy Frank Bullington were really into like the comedy side of hip hop. And so not just for Nebbiolo, but for the Aligote grape, for the Nebbiolo grape. We started writing these funny songs, putting videos to them, and they kind of circulated around the industry, but those were really fun. So yes, I do have the most viewed Aligote video on the internet currently, and maybe like the fourth or fifth most viewed Nebbiolo video on the internet.
Which I love. And for the show, it will definitely be linked in the show notes. We want to make sure people have access to this wonderful musical edition from you. But transition into that. Like, what is so great about Nebbiolo for you? I know it is, I don't mean to make light of it because I do know that it's something that you love. What's so great about Nebbiolo to you? And potentially also talk about the place where it comes from or where it's known to come from.
Right. So, what makes a grape like one of the classic grapes, one of the legendary grapes of the world is, I think, in two ways. One, it has to somehow translate the circumstances from where it's grown. So, whether that's soil, climate, the people, but it also has to be age worthy and, become more and more interesting as it ages. And just Nebbiolo is that kind of grape. And it's distinctly Italian, but it has traits that are similar to Pinot Noir, for example. The other great, wine connoisseurs all over the world or the industry feel is probably the best example of that. So as you're studying the whole world and you come across that, this grape has a really immense reputation, you start reading about where it comes from, you start tasting these wines, then you start having like kind of transitional or transformative experience with these wines, then you're completely locked in. And so Nebbiolo is one of those places where it does super well in really specific places. And whether it's Barolo and Barbaresco, other parts of Piemonte, whether it's other parts of the north, and when it's right, it's really right. But it's like can be elegant and like haunting and incredible with food and the kind of rare bottles that you can grab and taste with friends or collectors or unlike any of the other rare bottles that they are probably have in their cellars. So it's almost endless where you can stay fascinated with the grape.
Well, I love that. And let's talk about kind of where it's known to come from. There are a couple of other place regions we could mention in Italy, but the biggest one being Piedmont, right? So, can you kind of explain that and how that region helps kind of contribute to the versatility of what Nebbiolo can do?
Well, I think that, it just so happened that the hills, especially the south facing hills that are in the Langhe, happen to create some of the best examples. And I think if you rewound like, 100 some odd years, that, it was the places that are going to get right the best or the most consistently. And as everything's kind of warmed up and farming's gotten a little bit better, obviously just general consumer industry awareness of the grape and these territories have kind of grown. Then we start to look at places north of the Langhe, right? Like Alto Piemonte, like Gattinara and Gemme and Boca, and some of these places that are really kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so to speak. But because people came through those great examples from the Langhe, they're exploring all these other territories that can be really exciting and really much easier on the pocketbook than maybe some of the wines of the Langhe as well.
I love that. And I think, just in talking about, for the grape itself, mentioning the ageability and complexity that Nebbiolo can offer, it can also offer approachability, And I think examples that you see from the Longue, for instance, are really great kind of testaments to how versatile Nebbiolo can be.
Right. And you exactly hit it on the head, where I think, there was an overall consumer trend or wine industry trend to seek out wines that were more elegant. And it just so happened to be something that Nebbiolo could do really, really well. And so, to put a more specific point on it, we saw, for example, some really great producers in Barolo and Barbaresco making Langhe Nebbiolo not as kind of some junior version of their bigger, serious wines, but just really fresh and fruity and approachable and quaffable, and in some cases a little lower in alcohol, but just really kind of fun and delicious and a little less expensive. And I think that's been a huge lift to the whole category because it follows along with consumer trends and industry trends. And they've been blessed. Well, that area specifically, if you take the last 15 or 20 years, they've had an incredible amount of successful vintages, compared to against Burgundy or Bordeaux to a certain extent. So there's just a lot more of it. The range of styles is really great, really awesome. And again, like overall, the trend is to make more transparent, more elegant wines, but still keeping that seriousness and that complexity that you need for ageability.
Excellent. So let's dig into actually kind of those two iconic regions, I guess you would say, for Nebbiolo, which would be Barolo and Barbaresco. Kind of what are your thoughts of those regions and how did they become iconic in your mind?
In my mind, wow. Well, I think from a general sommelier standpoint, they've always been really important, really classic places. And I think for the most part, Barolo's reputations are maybe a little bit more broad and recognizable, though, pretty much thanks to Angelo Gaia, the whole territory of Barbaresco is very close in that. I think that from our restaurants specifically, just from name recognition, Barolo tends to have a little bit of an edge, in terms of sales. Or if we're choosing something by the glass, we might choose a Barolo more times than a Barbaresco just because, it has a higher rate of depletion. But that isn't to say that, like, again, some of the most legendary wines are coming from both territories. And it's really difficult to make generalizations about the style, right? If you read old textbooks, they'll talk about the overall general character of Barolo as being more kind of big, or they use words that seem outdated like masculine, and Barbaresco being a little bit softer and more feminine. Again, I don't think you can make those types of generalizations anymore. And there's full range of styles in both territories, and people who have really excellent sites and really excellent farming, and those that are still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and, we can't forget kind of historical trend benchmarkers in particularly the Barolo region, right? Like the traditionalists versus modernists in terms of, aging vessels and stuff like that, which I don't want to crack into that too much and create more, more tension, but it does explain this diversity of styles as well.
Right, exactly right. So, yeah, take those labels out of it because I don't think that's the conversation piece anymore.
Yes.
People who are being traditional versus modern. And the other thing that I think we should probably have with a grain of salt is as that territory like split up into or they designated MGAs single sites, is that we don't put too much more emphasis on single site wines versus wines that are blended over several sites. I think that's something we got to be really careful about. But we consistently compare it against Burgundy. And, those single sites, you have the Grand Crus and the Premier Crus, and everything sits in a nice kind of pyramid of quality. And I think, over time, there's been some of the most transformative examples of Barolo and Barbaresco that have been blends over different sites. There is something special about a single site wine for sure. But I think we just got to be real careful about how we perceive them and then how we price them, that we're not putting too much emphasis that they're of some sort of higher theoretical quality.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's really important, an important thing to note. I'm curious kind of what you're seeing in terms of that, like with Pappas Brothers and everything. What are some of the trends? Like you mentioned, like you might see more depletion with by the glass Barolo, for instance. But are there any other trends you can speak to in terms of what the demand is or interest is in Barolo Barbaresco, either?
Right. So, I find that people are still shopping by producer
Okay.
mostly. And so that's why, versus a Burgundian model where we might group it on the wine list by cru. So you're going to see all the Charm Chambertins all grouped together, regardless of producer. It's sort of the reverse as when we list Barolo and Barbaresco producers specifically. So you can find someone's, you know, general Barolo, you can find all their single sites, you can find even their reservas in that same cluster of listings, because I do think that's how people are shopping. And you can help communicate to the guests more about their philosophy of winemaking as it's expressed in those single sites if you want to, right? Oh, this producer has a little bit of Canubi, and Canubi is considered like the Grand Cru, of all the single sites, even though it may be getting quite hot there, but that's a whole different story. And, introduce the guests to there. So what's exciting to see from a consumer side is that they're starting to recognize and ask for certain sites. But I think it's all based on like getting them into a producer, maybe with a good story or good reputation. And then it's relatively easy to help them navigate to a successful vintage within the range of vintages that we have. So, it's nice to see the consumer engaging at several different points while they're shopping for serious Nebbiolo based wines, I think.
Right. And just in terms of what your offering is, do you find that Italian wine in general, but then more specifically Barolo Barbaresco, command as much interest as, I mean, I know, we've talked about Burgundy, maybe Bordeaux. I mean, it's a steak restaurant, so the big reds are going to be in there, but kind of where do you see it fitting in?
Yeah, I think specifically for Houston, they have a lot more French awareness, and their points of entry on Italian wines is sort of where they've traveled. And so they have traveled to, Tuscany, and they're starting to travel more to Piemonte. So you have better points of contact and points of excitement for the guests now than you did maybe even 10 years ago,
Ah,
because I think in general people are just traveling more. Now, if I were to go to Dallas, what's interesting about Dallas is that their kind of general average knowledge of Italian wine seems to be just a little bit more. And, they're still kind of a real American, California focused market, but they really do like their Italian wines and they kind of ask for them more. I think you still like if you have a guest that's interested in Italian wines, you're still up against the other great regions in the country. And so you are, pitting this against really great examples of Brunello, Amarone, in some cases Tarazi, but and of course a lot of people are really excited about Etna and Sicily in general, a lot because they're traveling there more and also because they watch the TV show, right? So but all of those things are super helpful. I don't think I've seen a time when awareness of these territories and wines has been higher. So, like, I'm really encouraged as to where this is all headed.
I love that. And I'm curious, just based on kind of what you know of Pappas Brothers menu, which yes, it's heavily on steak, but there's a lot of different ways you can cut that. Sorry, sorry for the pun. In fact, you and I a long time ago, I remember sitting down with Justin Van and gosh, was Jack Mason there? I can't remember on this, but like having a sherry dinner, right? Where like multiple different cuts of steak were paired with different sherries. And I'm curious, maybe if you could talk about like for you at Pappas Brothers, what do you want when you're going to pour? And this could just be you, or for some people who are just uber interested, what Barolo or Barbaresco is really a good pairing for some of the things that you guys have there?
All of them. No, but we're obviously a really classic steakhouse that, we specialize in dry aged products. And so, I think the tendency would be, well, you would want a more marbled cut to go with higher tannins. And that's certainly true. The reality is that this menu is just high volume flavor, just across the board. And what's interesting and very fresh ingredients and very vibrant flavors, but they're very, intense flavors, very loud flavors. And I think that echoes a lot into the ethos for the Italian table. And so it makes it such a natural fit for Italian wines because those wines are going to speak loud enough to hold up to any combination of really intense flavors. So, obviously a great one is lamb. We have a great lamb chop on the menu. And I make a kind of a reference to that in the song too, because I do think like aged Nebbiolo and lamb is a really special pairing. But I love it with any of those dry aged products. The strip is probably the sweet spot for, the right amount of marbling. It does see the dry aging. And you'd be surprised, like even the more kind of elegant, fresher examples of Barolo and Barbaresco will still hang in there. As those wines age, or let's suppose somebody's deciding to age in, some new oak and it kind of has a more hearty oak influence, just the intensity of those flavors are hanging in with the more earthy flavors of a dry aged product. So it's really the full range. We've done plenty of dinners with producers from Barolo and Barbaresco specifically and paired an entire menu. We have guests that come in and we'll do 3 or 4 examples in a row paired with their entire meal, which is a little tricky towards the beginning of that meal. But I think versatility there is probably one of its most valuable characteristics, just of those wines in general.
I love that you kind of explained that because there's versatility to your steak menu that kind of does, yeah, let those wines speak for themselves in different ways. So, one of the things that you'll be doing over the next few weeks is participating in the BBWO. You'll be doing 2 master classes, one in Dallas and one in Houston. This will be for trade. This will be master classes for other sommeliers in those particular markets. When you're educating about Barolo and Barbaresco, what are some things that you want to make sure people take away about the wines from those regions?
Yeah, I think on the trade side, kind of what we were just mentioning is that there are certain ideas that we should probably get away from in terms of over generalizing about these territories, about the wines. For example, Nebbiolo is an incredibly tannic. It has an incredible capacity for like natural tannin, right? And I'm sure over the course of the class, and I don't have the lineup specifically, but just in general, there are some examples that aren't so overly tannic or assertively tannic, right? So I think we have to find different sets of descriptors, like, and be careful not to overgeneralize to our guests. We certainly want to prepare our guests for what they're going to try, and learn how to like ask the right questions, because if this is all trade and they have contact with their distributors and their importers and their producers, that we're asking the questions that are going to matter to either what's in the glass or how your guest is shopping, right? So obviously some of that's going to be in the form of technique, both in the winery and in the vineyard. Knowing some of these sites, there's a lot of single sites in both Barolo and Barbaresco. And if we had to make a list of the ones that consistently have the highest reputation, then we should probably know those 10. Also, the ones simply that the producers feel are the best examples of their territories, because if you ask them, they might have a different answer than maybe someone who's just an enthusiast. So it kind of clearing up some of the overgeneralizations, like seeing how we can rethink about the region, how we can engage and get excited, get there more. It's a really easy place to go and visit. And I encourage everybody to go and visit and to know the foods from that region and just go and make friends.
I'm glad you brought that up because you actually go quite a bit. In fact, you've brought your family, what, for like a couple of months in the summertime to live in Alba or nearby. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. In a little like Airbnb just outside of Alba. But yeah, it's a really reasonable place. There's a little bit to do with kids, but yeah, they're good sports and it's an easy, like I said, it's an easy place to get to. So we like going there.
Yeah. I think that's really important. And I love that you brought up that, more people are traveling to other regions of Italy that can expose them to this. And Piemonte is certainly being one that's just, it's super beautiful. And I think one that you really have to see to understand that. So, I didn't want to brag too much on you at the beginning, but I will just mention to everyone that Stephen recently won Michelin Texas Sommelier of the Year. So, congratulations to that.
Thank you.
And the reason I wanted to spotlight that for you is just because, kind of from our perspective, just what an important piece of the puzzle you have been in terms of helping bring more sommeliers through their education process and mentoring and things like that. I'm curious if you could also talk about kind of you're educating them to help them know more, but ultimately, because of the hospitality angle, you're also educating them to help consumers more. So, what do you think you want consumers to be able to take away? Like, if they're able to go to the BBWO thing in March, for instance, in Austin, like they're going to be experiencing so many different producers, so many different wines from the regions. What are some things you want them to be able to think about as they're walking around?
A couple of things. First, I think that, a lot of these producers just make a really, really tiny amount of wine by comparison to some of their to the more famous regions, right? And I think that's something to keep in mind always, because I think to a consumer, a place like, Bordeaux might be in their mind as famous, but Bordeaux makes a bazillion times more wine than, say, the Longue does, right? So I think that that's something that you got to keep it kind of foremost in your mind as a consumer. Is like, man, it's really awesome that I get a chance to try these because, these don't get around very often. The other thing is like just a little basic vocabulary, right? So, knowing or being able to recognize, okay, well, this is a single site wine versus wine maybe with a fantasy name, knowing kind of what Longue means, right? Or Longue Nebbiolo. So you're able to understand that a little bit better. And then maybe have like a little understanding about the types of food that they're typically going with so that, the intensity or say, for example, the acid or the tannin profiles in these wines don't surprise you too badly, right? Just a few things, engage. You're going to find that everybody's super friendly, asking questions about sustainability and what they're doing in the vineyards is also really important because I think, Italians do a really good job with that. Anybody who's traveled there and has eaten a bunch of food and not felt sick or bloated knows that, overall their farming is really, really good across the board. So, just engage, learn some words, try as many things as possible. That's always my advice to anybody is just literally try as many things as possible without getting too drunk.
Yeah, maybe bring a spit cup with you,
Yeah.
no judgment here. No judgment at all. But I love that because I think size is a really important thing to remember. Yeah, we're used to either, large, high volume producers in some of the larger regions of the world. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot of artisan kind of level wine from here. And what a great opportunity to have a walk around where you can taste a lot of those that may not even be something you see often on the market. Maybe they've only been on wine lists in restaurants and harder to find on retail. This would be a place to be able to kind of explore some more that you may not have tasted before.
And vintages too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just ask them about vintages because you'll see their face change. Like, if like you're interacting with a producer, they're like, oh, this vintage was, and they're like, oh, this vintage was, and see if it matches up with how the wines are drinking. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So that's the other piece.
Ah, that's a great tip. I love that. That's perfect. And you're right. I mean, they get excited about vintages in the same way that they get excited about their different kids, right? Because they're, each vintage is very, very different. All right, well, let's end up on the food note because you've brought it up a couple times. You've spent quite a bit of time in Piemonte. And so maybe you can tell us about some of that food. What are some of the things that you absolutely have to have when you're there?
Agnolotti, and so they make a
Ah,
kind of inched agnolotti there called agnolotti plin. Tyrine, so the skinnier noodles, typically in a meat sauce, both do well, but tyrine, especially with like truffles, is pretty magical. There's bagna cauda, which is a really interesting, more kind of a wintry dish with veggies that seems really healthy, but it's very, it can make your breath stink a little bit. The a little bit more challenging too as a starter. Like you definitely want to try all the versions of vitello tonato. So veal with a tuna sauce doesn't sound super like exciting, but I guarantee you're gonna have a few that are really good. Yeah, and then just put truffles on everything. I think that's the answer to every meal. Just as many pastas, as many truffles as you possibly can.
I love that. So, like, the fall is just an amazing time to go when the white truffles, especially, are kind of on, people are on the hunt for them at that time. Okay, I want to go back to some of those because so vitello tonato, you're right. Like, it's not something that people are thinking really veal and tuna, but it becomes mysteriously addictive to me anyway.
Yes.
Like, I want to try it everywhere. But go back to, and I'm probably going to say it wrong, but the bagna calda, is that
Uh-huh.
okay?
Yeah. Yes.
So that I was actually reading kind of what's in that the other day, and I found it really fascinating. So, I mean, it's olive oil and butter heated up with a lot of garlic, a lot.
Yeah. And I think anchovy too.
Yeah. So then they add like kind of a minced anchovy into it, but it's essentially a dip where you're kind of
Yeah.
dipping vegetables, which could be anything from a carrot to celery. But I think in Piemonte, there's like a particular thistle that they use. And I don't know how to say it, but
Yeah, that might be advanced bagna cotta that I don't know that type of veg. But like my wife's mom is Piedmontese, so we just have like a tray of vegetables and we just dip it. Yeah.
yeah.
All sorts of types of vegetables.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to apologize in advance for all of my poor Italian pronunciation, particularly of, I'm not even going to say the foods again, but and Alba and Piemonte instead of Piedmont and Alba. That sounds so Texan. So you do a much better job. But thank you so much for your time and just kind of, breaking things down for us when it comes to Barolo and Barbaresco and giving us some tips because I look forward to walking around and kind of taking some of those with me when I'm at the tasting in March. But thanks for what you do for Texas and also for Pappas Brothers. And I look forward to coming back in again soon.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks for listening to this special series on the Barolo and Barbaresco World Opening 2025. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and rate us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Special note, this series is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the podcast participants only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or of the granting authority. Neither the European Union nor the granting authority can be held responsible for them.